Imagine a world not yet fully drawn. The seas teeter at the edges of the maps, marked by sea monsters and warnings of the unknown. Great stretches of land exist only in rumour, populated not by the people, but by legends. In this fragile veil between myth and reality, kingdoms are not always found. They're imagined, hoped for, prayed into being. And from the east, from lands too distant to verify and too magical to dismiss, a whisper crosses the sands and mountains. A mighty king, Christian, wise, powerful, ruling a vast empire of unimaginable wealth. His name is Prester John. In a time when Europe trembled between crusades and invasions, when the Christian world seemed ever under threat, the idea of Prester John was more than a story. He was a promise. A distant monarch, untouched by the chaos of the West, commanding a land of peace and prosperity, protected by rivers of gems and a border guarded by fire. His kingdom, it was said, lay somewhere in the east, perhaps in India, or beyond the realms of the Saracens, where Christianity not only survived, but thrived. The first whispers began in the 12th century. A letter arrived in the hands of the Pope. It was signed by Prester John himself. He described his kingdom in exquisite, fantastical detail. Unicorns roamed his lands, the fountain of youth flowed in his gardens, and his palace was built entirely of crystal. His empire, the letter claimed, stretched beyond the horizon, and he ruled over 72 kings, all faithful to Christ. For European leaders, desperate for allies in their fight against the Muslim powers of the Middle East, it was the answer to their prayers. A mighty Christian sovereign in the East, one who could rise up, strike from behind enemy lines, and restore balance in the Holy Land. Envoys were dispatched, gifts prepared, messages sent into the unknown. They never found him. Still, the idea refused to die. Over the centuries, Prester John shifted. When India proved fruitless, explorers turned their eyes to Central Asia. When Asia failed, they looked south, to the mountains of Ethiopia. Maps were redrawn, expeditions launched. Each failure seemed only to deepen the mystery. But there was a tension brewing beneath the surface. For every tale of Prester John's glories, there was a silence in return. No confirmation, no sign, no proof. The letters were strange, the details too perfect. And yet, the belief endured because the legend filled a void, the longing for a hero who could bridge the gap between the known and the unknown, between fear and hope. Here's the twist. Prester John may never have existed at all. Not as a man, not as a king, perhaps not even as a hoax. Some historians now believe he was something else entirely, a symbol, a story born from a collision of real encounters with Eastern Christianity and the wild imaginations of a Europe both curious and terrified of the world beyond its borders. But that doesn't lessen his impact. The myth of Prester John altered the course of history. It pushed explorers to sail further. It changed how Europeans viewed Africa and Asia. It gave hope to kings and popes, inspired crusaders, and shaped the colonial imagination for centuries. So we must ask, was Prester John real? Or was he a dream given flesh by parchment and ink, a ghost conjured by desperation and wonder? This is the story of a king who may never have lived, and yet changed the world. The 12th century was a time of both devotion and dread. Across Europe, the Christian world trembled under the weight of uncertainty. The Crusades, once born from a righteous cause, had become long and bitter. The Holy Land was contested, lost, and reclaimed in cycles of blood and fire. From the east, the rise of Islamic empires cast a shadow over Christendom. and each defeat struck deeper into the hearts of believers who feared that God's favour was slipping away. It was an era when the known world felt fragile and faith was tested daily. But it was also a time of legends, when a single story could lift the weight of a continent's despair. Then, like a beacon in a storm, it appeared. A letter. No one could say exactly where it came from. Some claimed it was delivered to the Pope. Others believed it travelled through the Byzantine court, carried by Eastern emissaries or cloaked pilgrims. The details of its arrival were murky, but the impact was clear. It was a sensation, a miracle, perhaps, or a trick of divine providence. The document bore the signature of a mysterious sovereign, Prester John, priest king of the East. And what a kingdom he ruled. The letter described an empire unlike any known to man. Prester John proclaimed himself a descendant of the Magi, the wise men who had followed the star to Bethlehem. His realm, he claimed, was a Christian paradise, untouched by the corruption and chaos of the West. In his words, his kingdom was bounded by the world's greatest wonders. Rivers flowed not with water, but with gemstones. The palace floors were of sapphire and crystal, and its pillars of solid ivory. A mirror of divine order, his court was home to exotic beasts, griffins, centaurs, manticores, and trees that bore fruit capable of healing any ailment. The letter even spoke of the fountain of youth hidden within his domain, and of a valley where the very stones hummed with the voice of angels. His rule extended over 72 kings. His people lived in peace. Justice was swift and incorruptible, and the name of Christ was spoken with reverence from dawn to dusk. Prester John needed nothing. He desired nothing. And yet, in his divine wisdom, he offered friendship to the Christian West, an alliance, a hand extended from paradise to a world at war. It was a fantasy, and yet it was believed, because Europe needed Prester John. Kings and popes seized upon the letter like a man clutches driftwood in stormy seas. To them, he was more than an ally. He was a savior, a holy warrior who could descend from the east and turn the tide against the infidel, a protector who could strike the Muslim forces from behind, sandwiching them between two mighty empires of Christ. In a time when Christendom saw itself as besieged, the letter was both a balm and a battle cry. Historians still debate whether anyone truly believed the letter was authentic, or whether belief even mattered. It stirred the hearts of men not because it was true, but because it needed to be. And what a chord it struck. This was a world still learning how to read. For many, scripture and myth were indistinguishable. The East had always been a place of mystery, filtered through centuries of hearsay, travelers' tales, and half-remembered history. The edges of the map were not just blank, they were sacred, dangerous, and seductive. Anything might live beyond them. The timing of the letter could not have been more perfect. The Second Crusade had ended in humiliation. The great armies of Europe, called forth by the Pope himself, had marched to the Holy Land and returned in disgrace. Morale was crumbling. Faith in earthly leaders had faltered. Even the authority of the church was beginning to show cracks. And then, this letter, this hope, this dream. Prester John was everything Europe wanted to believe still existed. A king who had held firm. A kingdom where Christianity was not just surviving, it was flourishing. While the West was soaked in war and sin, the East, it seemed, had preserved Eden. The letter quickly spread. Copies were made. Translations appeared across Europe. It was read aloud in monasteries and royal courts, copied by scribes in candlelit scriptoria. Artists painted scenes from its pages. Priests cited it in sermons. Maps were redrawn. The East, once empty, was now filled with a name, Prester John. It is easy to look back now and scoff. How could they believe such things? griffins and unicorns, rivers of gold. But that would be to misunderstand the power of the myth. For the medieval mind, the world was not a place of precise geography and rational logic. It was symbolic, allegorical. The line between faith and fact was blurred. The natural and the supernatural often walked side by side. And when you live in a world where miracles are real, where saints heal the sick and relics can bleed, then why wouldn't there be a holy king beyond the sands of Persia? There was something else too. Fear. Europe feared being alone. The Crusades had made it painfully clear that Christendom was no longer the dominant force in the known world. Islam was not only a religion, it was a civilization, unified, advancing, powerful. The Mongols, too, were on the horizon. Pagan, brutal, unstoppable. From the Baltic to the Levant, enemies gathered like storm clouds. To imagine a brother in arms, one who had remained hidden but strong, that was intoxicating. Prester John was never just a king. He was a lifeline, a reassurance that Christianity was not shrinking but spreading, that somewhere out there, beyond the mountains and deserts, the faith still burned bright. Letters were written in reply. Diplomats were sent east. Across the Silk Road, through the Mongol Empire, into the depths of Ethiopia, men searched for the phantom king. They spoke with Eastern Christians, translated strange texts, and mistook kingdoms for signs. They found wealth, power, even faith, but never him. Still, the legend endured. Each century reimagined him. When India proved fruitless, people claimed Prester John ruled in Central Asia. When that failed, they turned their eyes to Africa. Ethiopian emperors, some of whom were Christian, were sometimes believed to be him or his descendants. The name became fluid, reshaped to suit the needs of the time. And yet, one truth persisted: the letter. The original document, whose author remains unknown to this day, is now seen by many scholars as a deliberate fabrication, possibly a piece of political propaganda or a pious fiction meant to inspire the faithful. It combined fragments of real Eastern traditions, misunderstood travelers' tales, and pure invention. But whether written as deception or hope, it worked. It moved the hearts of men and women. It shifted the course of diplomacy. It inspired mapmakers, monarchs, and mystics. And even after its details faded into the dust of forgotten roads, its essence survived. Because Prester John was not just a name, he was the embodiment of a longing too vast to die. A longing for salvation, for order, for proof that somewhere in the world, beyond the reach of sin and war, there was still a place where the sacred reigned. A kingdom untouched, a king unbroken, a myth that was needed, perhaps more than it was ever believed. Legends are not fixed. They move with the winds of history, shifting shape to fit new landscapes, adapting to the questions that burn hottest in the hearts of the living. And so it was with Prester John. Firstborn in fantasy, then tethered to geography, his kingdom became a place not just of longing, but of constant relocation. At first, all eyes turned east. In the 12th and 13th centuries, maps were riddled with unknowns. To the medieval mind, Asia was a realm of mystery, a far-flung land of spices, silks, and ancient wisdom. It seemed the most plausible location for Prester John's fabled kingdom. After all, wasn't it said that his letter had come from the Indies? And wasn't Asia the land of marvels and monsters, where griffins roamed and rivers ran with gold? But something else made Asia particularly promising in the eyes of the West: the sudden meteoric rise of the Mongol Empire. By the early 1200s, the Mongols, led by the fearsome Genghis Khan, had exploded across the Eurasian steppe like a thunderclap. Their conquests stretched from China to Persia, sweeping aside kingdoms like dust. At first, the Christian world recoiled, The Mongols were pagan, brutal, alien. But in time, rumors began to swirl that softened this terror into curiosity. Among them was the tantalizing idea that the Mongols might not be godless barbarians after all, but long-lost Christians. Some even whispered that Genghis Khan, or one of his successors, might be Prester John. The confusion was not entirely unfounded. The Mongol Empire was vast and diverse, and some Mongol tribes had converted to Nestorian Christianity, an early branch of the faith that had spread eastward centuries before. In places like Central Asia and northern China, Christian communities survived in surprising numbers. European emissaries, upon encountering these strange Eastern Christians, eagerly connected dots that perhaps were never meant to be joined. Could this be the answer? Had Prester John risen after all, not in the deserts of Persia, but on horseback, cloaked in furs and steel, commanding a divine army from the roof of the world? Papal legates were dispatched. Letters were written to the Mongol Khans, sometimes with reverence, sometimes with dread. The hope was always the same: an alliance, a union between East and West against the shared Muslim enemy. But it quickly became clear that the Mongols had their own plans, and that they had no interest in playing the role of Europe's hidden savior. Their own god was conquest. As the centuries turned, eager explorers ventured further east, driven by the legend. Marco Polo, venturing deep into the heart of Asia, sought the fabled kingdom, but found only the sprawling dominion of the Khans, not the benevolent Christian monarch of Europe's dreams. No explorer is more synonymous with the East than Marco Polo. In the late 13th century, he set out from Venice and travelled all the way to the court of Kublai Khan in China. For 24 years, Polo lived, served, and explored the vast Mongol Empire. His travels took him through Persia, Central Asia, and the fabled lands of Cathay. If anyone was in a position to find Prester John, it was him. And indeed, Marco Polo did encounter tales of a Christian ruler in the East. In his memoirs, dictated while imprisoned in Genoa, he speaks of a figure called Ung Khan, a Nestorian Christian monarch who had ruled parts of Central Asia before being defeated by Genghis Khan. Could this Ung Khan have been the seed of the Prester John myth? To Polo, perhaps. To modern historians, likely. But Ung Khan was no magical king. He had no rivers of gems, no fountain of youth. His defeat by Genghis Khan marked the end, not the beginning, of any Christian stronghold in Asia. And so, slowly, the illusion began to crack. Asia was not hiding a priest-king. It had no Prester John. There were wonders, yes, temples and palaces, cities of unmatched wealth. But there was no holy monarch offering alliance and salvation, only the endless domain of the Khans. Europe, reluctant to let the dream die, continued to search. Maps grew more desperate. Some cartographers even placed Prester John's kingdom far to the north, near the source of the Volga or in the dark heart of Siberia. But eventually, Asia ran out of hiding places. And so, the myth moved again. But as the Asian trails grew cold, the gaze of Europe turned southward, to the mysterious continent of Africa. Here, in the highlands of Ethiopia, a powerful Christian kingdom had existed for centuries, hidden from the European eye. Africa had always been a land of both dread and wonder in the medieval imagination. Its deserts were vast, its forests dense, its coasts unknown. But there was one place, high in its eastern mountains, that began to capture the European mind in a new way: Ethiopia. Ethiopia was Christian, not just newly converted, but anciently so. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church claimed a lineage that stretched back to the time of the Apostles. According to local legend, Christianity arrived in Ethiopia in the 4th century, brought by a Syrian missionary named Frumentius. From that moment on, it had become deeply woven into the nation's identity. Here was a kingdom that prayed to Christ, celebrated Easter, and revered the Virgin Mary, all while being utterly cut off from the rest of the Christian world. To Europeans, this was astonishing. In an age where faith and geography were tightly bound, the idea of a Christian kingdom thriving in the heart of Africa was almost miraculous. And so, in the 14th and 15th centuries, the maps were redrawn once more. Prester John now ruled Ethiopia, or at least he could. European pilgrims and diplomats began to make their way down the Red Sea and into the highlands. They encountered a powerful monarchy, rich with tradition and ritual, ruled by kings who claimed descent from no less than King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This was the Solomonic dynasty, and it offered something Asia never could: a real Christian empire, one that could plausibly fit the legend. Ethiopia had its own ancient script, its own Bible, its own saints. It celebrated Mass with incense and chanting, spoke of Jerusalem with reverence, and kept relics older than some European cathedrals. It was alien and familiar all at once. European emissaries, upon arriving, were awestruck. They saw processions of robed priests, great stone churches carved into mountainsides, and a royal court steeped in divine authority. Some of these kings even welcomed the comparison to Prester John, perhaps as political theatre, perhaps as genuine belief. The Ethiopian kings did not deny the association. To the contrary, some embraced it. Prester John, they understood, was more than a name. He was a symbol. And in a world ruled by myth and map alike, symbols had power. And for a time, the myth and the monarchy walked hand in hand. European kings sent letters to the priest king of Ethiopia, hoping for alliance, for trade, for a confirmation that the old dream still lived. The Portuguese, in particular, grew fascinated by Ethiopia, sending Jesuit missionaries and military envoys throughout the 15th and 16th centuries. But slowly, cracks began to show once more. Ethiopia was strong, but it was not paradise. It had enemies, civil wars, droughts. Its kings were devout, but they were not miracle workers. The riches were real, but they were not bottomless. And while Ethiopia's Christianity was deep-rooted, it was also different, culturally, liturgically, theologically. It did not match the fantasy. Once again, Europe was left to wrestle with disillusionment. Prester John had slipped through their fingers. Not in Asia, not in Africa. He was always just beyond the horizon. But the damage, or perhaps the beauty, was already done. For centuries, the myth of Prester John had driven exploration, diplomacy, and curiosity. It had inspired artists, priests, and kings. It had stitched together fragments of truth and fantasy into something powerful, something necessary. And even when no one could find him, they never truly gave him up, because the myth had become too useful, too comforting, too enduring. Prester John was not just a legend. He was a map of the soul, of Europe's dreams and fears, of its longing for redemption, its hunger for allies, and its fear of the unknown. He was never found, because he was never meant to be. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the legend of Prester John had begun to fade from maps, but not from memory. His kingdom had changed shape, shifted continents, passed through the hands of khans and emperors. But perhaps his truest realm was not on any map, but in the space between hope and history. High in the mountains where the African continent rises toward the sun, mist gathers every morning above jagged escarpments, and rivers carve green furrows through volcanic stone. Here lies a land whose chronicles predate most of the kingdoms of Europe, a kingdom that names itself after the Lion of Judah and measures its history not in centuries, but millennia. When travelers from the Mediterranean first heard the word Ethiopia, they pictured a far-off province of marvels. Yet for the people who lived on those plateaus, the marvel was everyday life. church bells echoing across ravines, priests reading scripture in an ancient tongue, kings anointed beneath canopies of silk. Christianity reached these heights early, born on the tide of Red Sea trade long before Rome fell or Mecca stirred. On the throne of Aksum, beneath obelisks that pierced the sky, King Ezana listened to a young Syrian named Frumentius and chose the gospel as the heart of his realm. In the 4th century, his scribes struck new coins embossed with a cross, and suddenly an African kingdom joined the front rank of Christian nations. From that moment, the faith grew roots of basalt and cedar. Monastic cells blossomed on cliff ledges. Illuminated manuscripts glowed with scarlet and lapis. Psalms rose through incense and juniper smoke. Isolation tempered the belief into something brilliant and strange. The deserts of Nubia walled Ethiopia from Egypt, the Red Sea hemmed it from Arabia, and Muslim sultanates later narrowed the passes from the coast. Cut off from the theological quarrels of Constantinople and Rome, Ethiopian Christians spun legends of the Ark of the Covenant resting in Aksum and traced their emperors' bloodlines to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Every January in the festival of Timkat, they brought replica arks to the river, reenacting the baptism of Christ. Every spring, pilgrims crawled on their knees up stone stairways to rock-hewn sanctuaries where doves nested in window slits. For centuries, Europe knew almost nothing of this kingdom. Word traveled slowly across deserts, and when it came, it carried the distortion of distance. By the late Middle Ages, merchants in Venice and Lisbon traded rumors of an emperor somewhere in Africa who fought for Christ against encircling enemies. His palace, the stories said, glittered with emerald tiles. His armies rode ivory-harnessed elephants. His priests commanded fountains of eternal youth. The name given to him was Prester John, presbyter turned monarch, custodian of wonders. The legends blurred geography, placing his throne sometimes in India, sometimes in Central Asia, but a persistent whisper pointed southward toward the mountains beyond the Red Sea. The Portuguese were children of reconquest and saltwater. Having pushed the Moors from the Algarve, they now looked outward, tracing the outline of Africa in search of gold, spices, and a passage to the Indies that would circumvent Islamic middlemen. Their ships hugged the Guinea coast, sailed beyond the Canary Archipelago, and reached the Cape Verde headlands. Yet charts alone could not satisfy the crown of Aviz. They wanted partnership, crusade reborn, a pincer movement that would squeeze the Ottoman world between two advancing Christian fronts. If the priest-king were real, if he commanded legions and treasure, then the dream of Jerusalem reclaimed might live again. In 1487, King João II dispatched Pero de Covilhã and Afonso de Paiva eastward overland, disguised as merchants, armed with letters of greeting for the priest-king. Covilhã trekked through Egypt to Aden, crossed to Calicut, looped back through the Arabian desert, and finally, after years of perilous travel, reached Massawa on the Red Sea. There, Ethiopian envoys guided him inland to the royal camp. He never returned to Portugal. Instead, he remained an honoured but gentle prisoner, married locally, and wrote back tentative assurances that a Christian monarch did indeed rule the highlands. But no valley of rubies ringed his palace, and no river of pearls glittered beneath his balconies. 3 decades later, caravels unfurled again. This time they carried Father Francisco Alvarez, chronicler extraordinaire, and Dom Rodrigo de Lima, ambassador. They sailed up the Gulf of Aden, anchored near the port of Zaila, and threaded mountain passes until the high-walled capital of Emperor Lebena Dengel appeared like a mirage of stone and banner. Alvarez described audiences beneath painted canopies, nobles wrapped in cotton cloaks, pages perfumed with frankincense. He marveled at drums beaten by deacons, at liturgies chanted in gaze, at processions where priests shaded gilded tablets with lion-embroidered umbrellas. Every sight deepened Portuguese conviction that they had at last brushed the hem of legend. Lisbon rejoiced. To them, Ethiopia was proof of concept, a fortress of Christianity secluded since apostolic times. They pictured joint fleets striking at the Mamluk ports of the Red Sea, columns marching down from the highlands to liberate Jerusalem. Lebna Dengel welcomed their friendship, for he faced his own encirclement. To the east, the Adal Sultanate, led by Imam Ahmad ibn Ibrahim, massed cavalry and matchlock muskets. The emperor requested firearms. The Portuguese promised aid. For a shining moment, politics and prophecy seemed to stride the same road. But dreams tarnish quickly when hammered by necessity. The Portuguese discovered that Ethiopia's wealth lay in monasteries, not mint, in parchment, not bullion. Gold there was, especially panned from the rivers of the western frontier, yet it did not spill through palace corridors as European minstrels had sung. The empire's frontiers were vast, its administration stretched thin across ravines and isolated provinces. Roads were little more than mule tracks, and the royal army, though courageous, lacked the artillery European tacticians considered decisive. Elephant cavalry proved less effective than hoped against arquebusiers and cannons. Misunderstanding turned to friction. Father João Bermudes proclaimed himself Patriarch of Ethiopia without imperial consent. Jesuit Pedro Paes, more diplomatic, won respect and even supervised the construction of stone bridges. But his successors renewed pressure for union with the papacy. When Emperor Susenyos in 1622 accepted Catholicism, his nobles rebelled, and rivers of blood soaked the meadows of Gojam. 2 years later, he abdicated in favor of his son Fasilides, who expelled the Jesuits and sealed the passes. The priest-king, it seemed, had grown weary of foreign shepherds. Yet the myth of Prester John did not evaporate overnight. It decayed slowly. A pillar eroded grain by grain. Merchants along the Swahili coast still spoke of Christian kings inland. Map makers in Amsterdam continued to sketch fanciful crowns above Abyssinian plateaus. But travellers who braved the caravan trails returned with testimonies that sounded ever more ordinary. Peasants tilling teff, bishops adjudicating local quarrels, a monarch powerful but mortal, beset by drought as much as by invasion. Europe, haunted by its own wars of religion, shifted curiosity to the New World, leaving Ethiopia to its rhythm of fasts and feasts. There was still grandeur. Gondar rose with castles that mixed Portuguese bastions and Axumite towers, its turrets mirrored in the waters of royal bathing pools. Pilgrims still swarmed Lalibela, descending tunnels into cruciform grotto churches lit by beeswax candles. Imperial processions wound through cedar forests, priests shading the tabot with silken umbrellas, striped green, gold, and red. But none of this aligned with the extravagant inventories of the 12th century letter. No phoenix nested in palace eaves. No carbuncle stones illuminated banquet halls. The gulf between expectation and encounter widened into sober respect. Gradually, scholars in Seville and Paris began to treat the Prester John correspondence as literary curiosity rather than diplomatic fact. Gutenberg's presses flooded Europe with more accurate travelogues. Skepticism sharpened in the Age of Reason. By the 18th century, the priest-king had migrated from cartography to folklore, a ghost haunting the margins of books rather than the edges of continents. Yet the journey toward that realization had changed both seeker and sought. Ethiopia had glimpsed beyond its mountains. Portugal had tasted a Christianity older than its own. Hope, however, is a renewable resource. Even as Prester John faded, the hunger for astonishing allies persisted. European courts shifted their gaze to mythical kingdoms of the Pacific, to lost cities of the Amazon, to El Dorado glimmering in Andean valleys. People cling to tales that promise rescue from uncertainty, be it spiritual salvation or material abundance. Ethiopia's story became a parable within that larger pattern. The moment when reality, though remarkable, could not rival imagination. Still, for the descendants of those highland emperors, the encounter with Portugal left enduring traces. Gunsmiths learned to refit arquebuses. Architects blended manuline scrollwork with indigenous stone. Linguistic loans peppered Amharic with maritime Portuguese terms. Centuries later, when European powers scrambled to partition Africa, Ethiopia alone among ancient kingdoms defended its sovereignty at the Battle of Adwa, its warriors carrying, alongside modern rifles, the unbroken memory of being sought as equals rather than subjects. Looking back, what lingers is neither the mirage of jeweled rivers nor the sorrow of dashed expectation, but the quiet marvel that two civilizations met because of a story. A forged letter coursed through medieval veins, igniting desire powerful enough to launch fleets, cross deserts, and climb escarpments into thin air. In chasing a phantom, Portugal discovered a real Christian kingdom. Ethiopia, curious yet cautious, stepped briefly onto the global stage. The Lion of Judah was never the priest-king of legend, yet his roar reverberated across oceans. The tale, therefore, resolves not with disillusionment alone, but with a tempered admiration. Reality may fall short of fantasy, but it often surpasses it in complexity, courage, and grace. Ethiopia did not need sapphire streets to command respect. Its legitimacy lay in scripture inked on goatskin, in starlight slanting through rock-cut windows, in monarchs who traced lineage to ancient Israel. The Portuguese did not find the ally of crusading prophecy, yet they encountered faith burning just as fiercely as their own, and in that discovery, both sides were enlarged. And so the search for Prester John in the land of the Lion of Judah stands as a testament to human longing, the rising thrill of possibility, the sobering hush of discovery, and the enduring lesson that behind every legend waits a story even richer, if only we have the humility to see it. What remains is the echo, a soft reminder carried on alpine winds, that myths map not the earth but the soul, plotting the distance between fear and hope, between what we dream and what we dare to learn from one another. In the twilight of the medieval world, amid shifting empires, wars of religion, and uncharted continents, one legend refused to die. It clung to maps, whispered in royal courts, and fired the imaginations of explorers and common folk alike. This was the legend of Prester John, the mythical Christian monarch said to rule a wondrous kingdom beyond the edges of known lands. Why did this legend persist for so many centuries? Why did it refuse to die, even after repeated disappointments and countless failed expeditions? What deep human desires, fears, and aspirations did Prester John's story embody? To answer these questions, we must delve beneath the surface of history into the very human psyche and explore how faith, politics, curiosity, and the hunger for hope combine to make Prester John an enduring myth. Psychological needs, the comfort of a heroic myth. Humans have always told stories to make sense of a confusing world. Stories give shape to fears and hopes, create heroes to admire and villains to oppose. The legend of Prester John served as a powerful symbol, a shining beacon in the dark uncertainty of the Middle Ages. Imagine the mindset of a Europe locked in endless warfare, schisms within the church, and frequent famine or plague. News from distant lands came filtered through hearsay, fear, and exaggeration. Into this void stepped Prester John, a king whose realm was untouched by the corruption and violence that plagued Christendom. a realm of abundant riches, powerful magic, and devout piety. He was not only a king, but a priest, blending spiritual and temporal authority in a way that satisfied the human need for order and meaning. Prester John represented an ideal, a Christian utopia, untouched by the conflicts tearing Europe apart. For individuals facing hardship and uncertainty, the legend offered hope that somewhere beyond the horizon, good triumphed and peace endured. This psychological need, hope for salvation, order, and justice, is a core reason the legend persisted. It gave people a vision of a better world, a sanctuary where faith and virtue held sway. Such a myth, deeply rooted in collective yearning, naturally resisted extinction. The endurance of Prester John's legend was also fueled by powerful religious and political motives. In medieval Europe, religion was not just a private matter, but the foundation of society, law, and governance. The Crusades were a manifestation of the desire to reclaim the Holy Land, to defend Christendom, and to unite the Christian world against Muslim powers. Prester John was imagined as the perfect ally in this grand struggle. A mighty Christian monarch somewhere beyond the known world, whether in Asia or Africa, he represented a potential reinforcement against Islamic powers encroaching from multiple fronts. For rulers and church leaders, the possibility of an alliance with Prester John promised to turn the tide in holy wars. This political hope drove kings and popes to send emissaries in search of this fabled ally, to open diplomatic channels, and to support exploratory missions. The Portuguese voyages to Ethiopia in the 15th and 16th centuries were motivated as much by this desire to find Prester John as by commercial interests. Moreover, the legend became a tool for missionaries aiming to convert new peoples. The idea that Prester John was a Christian king inspired hopes of mass conversions and strengthened the rationale for crusades, religious orders, and colonial expansion. Thus, religious fervour and political ambition combined to keep the legend alive. It was not merely an idle tale, but a beacon for real policy and action. At the heart of the Prester John legend lies a profound human fascination with the unknown. Since time immemorial, people have been captivated by stories of hidden cities, secret kingdoms, and lost treasures. The unknown excites the imagination because it represents possibility, the possibility of discovery, adventure, and transformation. Prester John's kingdom was often described as a land of marvels, endless riches, strange beasts, miraculous powers. These fantastic elements embodied the allure of mystery. The unknown was a place where the impossible might be possible. This desire to believe in hidden wonders was part of why maps included Prester John's kingdom for centuries, often in blank or unexplored areas. Cartographers themselves indulged in this myth-making, sometimes based on travellers' tales, other times simply as placeholders for the mysterious. The idea of Prester John also aligned with medieval ideas about sacred geography, where the world was divided into known and unknown realms, often with spiritual significance. A remote Christian kingdom represented a sacred frontier, a boundary between the safe and the chaotic. In this sense, the legend fed humanity's deeper craving for meaning in the vast and often frightening unknown. It was a map not just of lands, but of hope and mystery. Cartography and exploration, the legend as a catalyst. One of the most tangible impacts of the Prester John legend was its influence on cartography and the age of exploration. Medieval maps often incorporated legendary places alongside real geography. The land of Prester John, sometimes placed in Central Asia, India, or Africa, was a fixture on many maps. It offered explorers both a goal and a guide. These maps inspired explorers to push beyond familiar coastlines and into the vast unknown. The search for Prester John was one motivation behind Portuguese and later Spanish voyages around Africa and across the Atlantic. Explorers hoped that finding this kingdom would open new trade routes and secure political alliances. The search spurred geographic discoveries that reshaped the world's understanding, mapping coastlines, charting seas, and connecting continents. Even when Prester John remained elusive, the myth propelled the spirit of discovery that defined the Renaissance and early modern period. It helped transform a fragmented medieval world into a connected global one. In that way, the legend of Prester John was not just a story, but an engine driving real-world change. Another key reason the legend endured was its remarkable adaptability. The story of Prester John was never fixed in one place or form. Over centuries, it shifted across continents, from Central Asia to India to Ethiopia. Its attributes evolved depending on the needs and beliefs of those telling the tale. When new explorers failed to find him in one location, the story moved elsewhere, always keeping alive the hope that this powerful Christian monarch existed somewhere. This flexibility meant the legend could survive changing historical circumstances. Whether it was medieval crusading zeal, Renaissance curiosity, or early colonial ambitions, the legend found new relevance. It also adapted to new religious and cultural frameworks. For instance, the association with Ethiopia grew stronger in the 15th century, after contact with the ancient Christian kingdom, linking the legend with a real place and people. Because of this, Prester John did not disappear suddenly, but gradually faded as a widely believed fact, remaining a potent symbol in folklore, literature, and art. At its core, the persistence of the Prester John legend reveals the human need for hope and meaning. Throughout history, myths serve as repositories for our collective dreams and fears. They offer narratives that help societies and individuals cope with uncertainty, loss, and hardship. Prester John's kingdom was a promise that there was still a place where faith triumphed, where justice ruled, and where goodness could be found beyond the reach of worldly troubles. Even after explorers brought back disappointing reports, the legend's underlying message endured. The hope that such a kingdom might exist somewhere sustained optimism in bleak times. In this way, Prester John functioned less as a historical fact and more as a psychological and cultural anchor, a story humanity needed to tell itself. The story of Prester John teaches us about more than medieval geography or lost empires. It reveals something fundamental about the human condition. It shows how myths arise to fill gaps in knowledge, how they serve religious and political agendas, how they feed curiosity about the unknown, and ultimately, how they endure because they speak to universal human desires. The legend persisted, not simply because people refused to accept reality, but because it embodied hope in the face of uncertainty, a yearning for salvation, and the dream of a world where light overcomes darkness. Though the kingdom of Prester John was never found, the myth shaped history, inspired exploration, and endured in human imagination. It stands as a testament to the power of stories and the profound human need to believe in something greater. The story of Prester John did not end with the failure to find his kingdom. Far from fading into obscurity, this phantom king became woven into the very fabric of medieval and Renaissance culture. His legend shaped art, literature, and the popular imagination in ways that extended far beyond any maps or royal letters. Throughout Europe, tales of Prester John sparked the creativity of poets, painters, and playwrights. He appeared in illuminated manuscripts, where miniature scenes portrayed his court filled with wondrous sights, majestic palaces, fantastical creatures, and ceremonies blending the sacred with the exotic. Artists used Prester John as a symbol of an ideal Christian ruler, one who combined holiness, wisdom, and strength to govern a realm untouched by the corruptions of the old world. In literature, the figure of Prester John evolved from a distant, mysterious monarch into a character who embodied hope and the possibility of a better world. Writers of the time, fascinated by the idea of a powerful Christian ally beyond the known frontiers, incorporated him into epic tales and romances. These stories spread throughout Europe, fueling imaginations and keeping the legend alive, even when reality did not match expectation. The influence of Prester John extended beyond texts and pictures. His name became shorthand for any distant, unknown kingdom rumoured to be rich in gold, gems, or spiritual power. Travellers and adventurers carried this symbol with them as they embarked on voyages into uncharted lands. The legend, in essence, became a beacon, an incentive that drove the curiosity and courage of explorers. It is here, in the age of exploration, that the pursuit of Prester John played a surprisingly significant role. While the king himself remained elusive, the search for his realm set in motion journeys that led to genuine discoveries. Explorers sailing down the coasts of Africa, navigating through treacherous straits, and crossing vast oceans were motivated in part by the hope of making contact with this fabled kingdom. Though they never truly found Prester John, these voyages inadvertently opened new worlds to Europe. They revealed lands and cultures previously unknown, brought back knowledge of unfamiliar peoples, and created new routes for trade and communication. The pursuit of the Phantom King was, in this sense, a catalyst for an age of discovery that transformed the global map and reshaped history. Beyond the tangible impact on exploration, the legend also contributed to a broader cultural theme: the search for a hidden utopia. Prester John's kingdom was often imagined as a paradise on earth, a land free from the political intrigues, religious strife, and social injustices plaguing Europe. This idea of a pure, uncorrupted society nestled far away fed into a larger tradition of utopian thought. Writers and philosophers would later develop these utopian ideals, envisioning perfect societies where harmony and justice prevailed. The legend of Prester John can be seen as a precursor to this, a medieval expression of a deeply human longing for a better world. It reflected the desire not only for material wealth, but for moral and spiritual renewal. The concept of the noble savage or the untouched other also finds echoes in the Prester John narrative. His kingdom was exotic, mysterious, and yet fundamentally Christian, a blend of the familiar and the unknown. This paradox made the legend compelling. It allowed Europeans to imagine a world beyond their borders that was both different and yet connected to their own values and hopes. Even after the practical search for Prester John faded, the myth's symbolic power persisted. It became a mirror reflecting the aspirations and anxieties of those who believed in it. As new continents were mapped and the realities of the wider world became clearer, the legend transformed from a literal hope into a metaphor for the human quest itself. The enduring power of myth lies precisely in this ability to shape human endeavour, regardless of its factual truth. Myths like that of Prester John influence decisions, inspire creativity, and provide frameworks for understanding the unknown. They can justify exploration, fuel political alliances, and even alter cultural identities. In the end, Prester John was never a real monarch reigning over a hidden kingdom. Yet, through the centuries, the legend became a force that propelled history forward. It intertwined with the ambitions of empires, the curiosities of explorers, and the dreams of countless individuals seeking meaning beyond the borders of their known world. This legacy reminds us that myths are not mere falsehoods to be discarded, but powerful stories that shape how we perceive reality and imagine the future. The Phantom King, elusive and intangible, became a symbol of hope, mystery, and the boundless human desire to discover what lies beyond the horizon. In the 21st century, the legend of Prester John remains a fascinating subject, not only for historians but also for those intrigued by the power of myth and the human imagination. Modern scholarship approaches this medieval tale with a blend of critical inquiry and cultural appreciation, peeling back the layers of fantasy to understand its origins and enduring impact. Today's historians recognize Prester John as a product of its time, a legend born from the anxieties, hopes, and limited geographical knowledge of medieval Europe. The Crusades, the expanding boundaries of Christendom, and the encounters with unfamiliar cultures all fed into the creation of a mythical Christian king who could serve as both an ally and an ideal. Scholars analyze the letters attributed to Prester John as forgeries, likely crafted to inspire and manipulate political ambitions, or to provide comfort amid the turmoil of religious conflict. Yet, while modern academics debunk the literal truth of the legend, they also acknowledge its profound symbolic significance. Prester John is understood as a reflection of the human need to believe in something greater, an embodiment of hope during dark times. The myth illustrates how stories can fill gaps in knowledge, offering explanations where facts are scarce, and providing a sense of order in a chaotic world. Beyond its historical context, the legend serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of knowledge and the dangers of wishful thinking. It reminds us how easily facts can be distorted when filtered through desire and fear, and how myths can sometimes obstruct our understanding by promoting illusions over evidence. Yet the story of Prester John is not merely about deception or folly. It teaches us about resilience, the persistence of hope even when confronted with harsh realities. The legend endured because it fulfilled psychological and cultural needs. It offered a narrative of salvation and strength, a promise that somewhere beyond the horizon lay a protector who could restore balance to a fractured world. In a broader sense, Prester John speaks to a universal aspect of human nature, the craving for wonder. Despite all the advances in science and exploration, the allure of hidden kingdoms, lost civilizations, and secret realms continues to captivate us. This yearning drives exploration, creativity, and storytelling, reminding us that some mysteries are less about finding answers and more about inspiring questions. In the modern era, the figure of Prester John has found new life beyond historical texts. He appears in novels, films, video games, and popular culture, transformed into a symbol of mystery and adventure. Writers and creators use the legend as a springboard for imagining alternative histories and fantastical worlds. This ongoing reinvention highlights how myths evolve, adapting to contemporary sensibilities while retaining core themes of hope and discovery. The story also connects to a wider tradition of legends about lost realms and hidden powers. Like Atlantis, El Dorado, or Shangri-La, Prester John's kingdom represents the dream of a perfect place, a sanctuary untouched by the troubles of the outside world. These stories serve as metaphors for human ideals, reflecting desires for peace, justice, and prosperity. By comparing Prester John to other enduring myths, we see how cultures across time and space have created narratives that both explain and inspire. These legends often emerge at moments of uncertainty, offering visions of what might be possible if only we could cross the boundaries of the known. They are as much about the present and future as about the past. In reflecting on Prester John, we confront fundamental questions about belief and truth. How do stories shape our perception of reality? When does imagination serve us, and when does it mislead? The legend invites us to consider the balance between skepticism and faith, knowledge and mystery. Ultimately, the legacy of Prester John is a testament to storytelling's enduring power. Even as scholarship continues to uncover historical truths, the myth persists, not because it is true, but because it speaks to something deeply human. It reminds us that legends are not merely relics of the past, but living narratives that continue to shape how we understand ourselves and the world. As we move forward into an era defined by information and technology, the story of Prester John encourages us to embrace curiosity without losing sight of reason. It challenges us to keep exploring, imagining, and questioning, recognizing that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from what is found, but from the stories that inspire the search. We have journeyed far across centuries and continents, tracing the legend of Prester John from its earliest whispers in medieval Europe, through the eager searches across Asia and Africa, to the realization that this elusive king was never truly a flesh and blood ruler, but rather a powerful myth. From the first mysterious letters that ignited imaginations, to the Portuguese expeditions seeking an ally in distant Ethiopia, the story unfolded like a tapestry woven from hope, fear, faith, and human longing. The legend of Prester John began as a distant murmur, a promise whispered in times of turmoil, when the Christian world sought strength against encroaching forces and yearned for a powerful friend beyond the horizons. The promise of a mighty Christian monarch reigning over a land filled with unimaginable wonders struck a chord deep within the hearts of kings and commoners alike. It was a dream born from desperation and faith, an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. Over centuries, explorers braved perilous journeys, driven by this dream. From the Mongol steppes of Asia to the rugged highlands of Ethiopia, they searched for evidence of this hidden kingdom. Each expedition brought new knowledge, new cultures, and new stories, yet no definitive proof of Prester John's kingdom was ever found. Still, the legend endured, evolving and adapting, a reflection of humanity's enduring need to believe in something greater. It is remarkable that a figure who never walked the earth, who never ruled a kingdom, could have such a lasting impact on history. But this is the power of myth. It exists beyond facts, beyond proof, in the realm of emotion and imagination. Prester John was less a man and more a symbol of hope in dark times, a promise that somewhere, beyond the known world, there lay a sanctuary, a kingdom of light, justice, and faith. This emotional resonance is the heart of the story. It speaks to something universal in the human experience, a yearning for connection, for allies in a world that often feels hostile and uncertain. It embodies the desire for discovery, not just of lands and riches, but of meaning and belonging. Prester John's kingdom was a mirror reflecting the aspirations and fears of countless generations. Perhaps this is why, despite repeated disappointments and the passing of centuries, the legend never faded completely. It adapted, inspiring art, literature, exploration, and the dreams of those who dared to imagine a world more wondrous than the one they knew. It reminds us that human history is shaped not only by facts and events, but also by the stories we tell ourselves. And so, as we close this chapter on Prester John, the king who never was, we are left with a profound question. What does it mean to believe? What is the nature of the stories that captivate us, and how do they shape our reality? When does hope inspire courage, and when does it blind us to truth? These are questions as relevant today as they were 1,000 years ago. Prester John never existed as a ruler, yet in the minds and hearts of those who believed, he was as real as any monarch. He was a beacon of hope, a symbol of the human spirit's capacity to dream beyond the confines of the present. In a world still filled with mysteries, both external and within ourselves, perhaps we all carry a bit of Prester John inside us. We are all seekers, forever searching for that elusive, perfect kingdom where justice, peace, and faith reign supreme. This legend invites us to embrace both skepticism and wonder, to recognize that the unknown is not just a void to be feared, but a canvas for imagination and hope. It challenges us to explore not only the world around us, but the depths of our own hearts and minds. As you reflect on this story, consider the countless other mysteries that remain unsolved, other legends, other histories waiting to be uncovered. The world is vast, and our understanding ever incomplete. The spirit of discovery that drove the search for Prester John lives on in every quest for knowledge, every exploration of the unknown. So, keep asking questions, keep seeking stories. Let the legend of Prester John inspire you to look beyond the obvious, to find meaning in myth, and to hold space for wonder in a world too often dominated by certainty. Because in the end, the true kingdom is not one of gold or armies, but the realm of human imagination, a place where dreams endure, legends live, and hope never dies. If you've enjoyed this journey into history and legend, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to explore, mysteries, myths, and stories that have shaped our world in ways we're only beginning to understand. Don't miss out on the next adventure. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we uncover the past, one story at a time.